Hey guys, Bob from RetroRGB here, and this is the first of a multi-part episode about the Sega Dreamcast and its different video outputs. The Dreamcast, Sega's final hardware console, was released in 1998 in Japan and 1999 elsewhere worldwide. This was still a few years before flat-screen TVs would become commonplace in people's homes, and it was still right on the cusp of the 480p television era. While we had progressive scan in computers for quite a while before this, most of us still didn't have anything other than your standard 480i TV in our homes, which makes the Dreamcast kind of unique because it does output a 480p signal. This video is going to concentrate on all of the CRT gaming with Dreamcast, and we're going to break off the flat screen gaming into the next episode because that's kind of a whole other beast in itself. Gaming on CRTs is much more straightforward, and the Dreamcast has a few different ways to accomplish that. The Dreamcast's AV out supports many different signal formats, including standard definition such as composite video, which was the most commonly used back then, as well as S-video and RGB, which come in the form of RGB S pins, S being sync, both horizontal and vertical syncs combined into one. These outputs only support 240p and 480i interlaced, making them standard definition. The Dreamcast AV out also has pins for VGA, supporting RGB HV, which is your standard horizontal and vertical syncs separated. This output supports up to 480p, which is a progressive scan output, and it looks much better than the interlaced flicker of 480i. Let's start out looking at the different formats and the best ways to connect them based upon your setup. When the Dreamcast was first released, by far the most common way to hook it up was composite video cables. Now, of course, this video is talking about the best output you can get from your Dreamcast, and composite video is just about as bad as you can get these days. You can move up to an S-video cable, which is really a great solution if you're just using a standard definition television, but if you really want the best standard def signal out of a Dreamcast, you need to use RGB. Now, if your monitor is something like a Sony PVM that only supports 240p and 480i 15 kHz signals, then just simply getting an RGB SCART cable is really a great solution. Almost every single game supports 480i. I actually think every game might support 480i for the Dreamcast, so you'd be able to play the whole library, and many games even support 240p, which look great on an RGB monitor. So while there's definitely better solutions if you're going to use multiple monitors or if there's a chance you're going to be using 480p in the future, if you know your scenario or maybe even this one part of your setup will always and only be 240p and 480i, just grab an RGB SCART cable, and I'd try to get one that syncs on C-Sync and not composite video. That way you could reduce any amount of interference or jail bars that could potentially interfere. Now, if you're unfamiliar with any of these terms, such as C-Sync or RGB SCART, definitely go and check out my website, which shows all these things in detail, and I'm coming out with a few other videos soon that also explain these things, just so you could familiarize yourself with the terms. But I'm going to assume that you guys already know what all those are, and then move along to the next best option. This next solution is for people that just want to use a VGA cable from the Dreamcast. This particular scenario I'm showing I think is quite common, and it's using a PC VGA monitor with the 480p VGA cable for the Dreamcast. A solution like this is shockingly really high quality. Old PC monitors do look great in 480p as long as there's not too much wear on them, and the solution is extremely inexpensive. I bought this monitor here for $10 at a junk store, and you could find Dreamcast VGA cables for under $20 that work great for just 480p. Keep in mind though, this is only 480p VGA, so it's pretty limited in what you could use, but I actually think that it's quite a common scenario, and I think even more so than using 480i through a Sony PVM, just because you really get the most out of Dreamcast in 480p mode. So while the last two scenarios I showed are people that are really just want only 480i RGB or only 480p VGA, what's coming up next I think is best for everyone in general, unless you specifically fall into these two scenarios that I just discussed. My favorite Dreamcast solutions are made by the Behar Brothers located in Istanbul. They create Dreamcast VGA boxes that handle absolutely everything you could imagine. And while each one has its own features, I'm going to concentrate mostly on the video output, as I already did a pretty detailed video about the Toro, which I'll link to down below if anybody's interested. Basically, they have 3 Dreamcast boxes. They have the Kuro, the Hanzo, and then the Toro. Now, the Kuro and the Hanzo are pretty much identical with one exception. They both have VGA outputs, and they're both switchable between VGA and RGB, but the Hanzo actually includes a scanline generator, which even for CRTs might come in handy sometimes, because you could actually make a 480p signal look exactly like a 240p signal. For the most part, though, I think there's really only a small use case for the Hanzo and the Kuro, and that's not an insult to the Behar Brothers. I'll just explain why pretty quickly. When you're using the Hanzo, it outputs RGB HV, a full VGA signal. And I think in the retro gaming world, the most common case of a CRT usage with this would be in something like a Sony PVM or BVM that supports all different resolutions. In this case, the rear of those monitors only accept RGBS, where the sync is combined. And while yes, you could technically use a Y cable to tie them together, I don't recommend it at all. I really recommend going through a sync combiner. So while this is a perfectly good solution, and it absolutely works fine, if you don't already own a sync combiner or you don't know all the different things involved in it, it really just becomes a little bit too complicated and a little more expensive than one would want. This is really, the Hanzo and the Kuro are really just meant for situations like with an XM29 monitor, the NEC monitor that supports all resolutions through RGB HV. If you have any monitors like that, then these are perfect, because you just plug in a cheap VGA cable. You can get shielded VGA cables very cheap nowadays from pretty much anywhere. Plug it right in, and then switch to whatever resolutions you prefer and go from there. So other than that, most of the time you're going to need to convert it. And that is where the Toro comes in. This thing has every option you could imagine. It does both SCART and VGA. It can output at the same time, but more importantly than anything, there's either a button or jumpers inside, depending on the model Toro you get, that select between RGBS and RGB HV. That means that if you have a Sony BVM monitor like the one shown here, you can either just get a SCART to BNC cable, or you could just simply get a VGA cable that only outputs RGBS BNC on the other side, which comes in handy really well for situations like this. So essentially, this has the sync combiner built into it, making it cheaper overall. This is by far my favorite solution for the Dreamcast. It's a bit on the expensive side, but there is nothing that you can't do with this box. Between the dual outputs, the switchable RGBS, RGB HV output, separate audio outputs, plus of course the scan liner function and everything else, this is really the solution that I think any true Dreamcast fan who games on CRT monitors would really want. Unless you fit that smaller use case before of just an RGB monitor or just a VGA monitor, this really covers it all, including having both. I know lots of people that spent, good money on a great PVM that only supports 240p and 480i, and then just went out and bought a cheap VGA monitor, so they just switched between them. If you have the room to do this, it's very much more cost effective than trying to hunt down a tri-sync monitor. So that should be just about everything you need for CRT gaming with the Dreamcast. I went through each of the individual cable solutions, which, depending on your situation, might be fine, as well as went over a few of the Behar Brothers boxes. Now, I didn't go through any of the other Dreamcast boxes available simply because they're not made anymore. If you can get an original Sega one, that's fine. I believe that's VGA only, and there's a few others that have been made over the years. But the Behar Brothers boxes are readily available, and they output really, really high quality. So when you're talking about getting the best RGB or the best VGA, you get both out of these boxes. And that's not to say that you couldn't get a high-quality RGB Dreamcast cable and have a perfectly good solution. I'm just simply stating that you will get the best of both worlds out of these. And the reason I like the Toro so much is it just covers every scenario. So say you have an existing SCART switch set up on a monitor that only accepts 480i and 240p. You just plug it right into your SCART cable, plug it into the SCART switch, and you're done. But then you want to go play a 480p game, so you just unplug this, switch it back to RGB HV, plug in a VGA cable, and then go plug it into your computer monitor. So this will take care of both. And also the fact that you can get 480p through the SCART output means you could use your existing SCART switch solution to go to your multi-sync monitor, or to even flat screen solutions through upscalers, which we'll discuss next time. So that pretty much sums up CRT gaming, and the reason I wanted to split off that from the flat screen is because the way flat screens interpret the Dreamcast's video signal is a little bit complicated and confusing. To be honest, I actually had to have a few people explain it to me a few times before I really grasped what was going on. So I felt it was best to separate the episodes, both because maybe you were only gaming on CRTs, so you don't care, and also this is a good primer for the next one. Everything we went over in this video, we'll need to know this information to get to the flat screen video, so hopefully I'll finish that one soon and be back with all the info you need. Before I go, I just need to thank all of my Patreons. I can't thank you guys enough. Videos like this would not be possible without your support. And if anybody wants to join, I'll have links down below. Subscribe on YouTube at the very least if you haven't already. And as always, any comments or criticism, please post down below. I really take it seriously, and I don't mind the negative criticism. I really try to improve every time. I just need your guys' help doing it. So if I missed something in this episode, let me know. If there's something specific that you want to see in the flat screen episode, hopefully that'll only be a few weeks away. And I guess that's pretty much it. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.